If you started playing cheap car repair thinking it was just going to be another relaxing simulator, you've probably already realized that's not quite the case. Old cars break down everywhere, parts fail back to back, and money vanishes faster than it should. But the truth is, the game features several hidden systems that make all the difference. And if you don't understand this early on, you will always end up losing money. Today, I'm going to show you 10 advanced tips that worked very well for me and might help you too. So if you want to progress quickly and stop wasting time on pointless repairs, stick with me until the end. One technique I started using heavily, especially when I was further along in the game, is what I call minigame canceling. You know when you enter a repair minigame and immediately notice that the green blocks are horribly positioned, making it almost impossible to succeed? Well, it's not worth forcing it. What many people don't realize is that you can simply hit EST right away and exit the minigame before spending any resources. And the best part, when you re-enter, the block layout changes. In other words, you can basically re-roll until you get a much easier and safer configuration. This works incredibly well for activities like painting, welding, and alignment, which are precisely the ones that drain the most resources if you mess up. At the start of the game, you might not notice it as much, but in the late game, when every mistake is costly, this technique makes a massive difference to your economy. For me, it became almost automatic. I enter the minigame, take a quick look at the positioning, don't like it, ESC immediately. It's simple, doesn't break the rhythm, and saves you a ton of frustration. If you want to play more optimally and efficiently, especially during the final stages, this is one of those tips that seem minor, but completely change the game. This is the kind of tip that separates those who just fix cars from those who actually turn a profit. Early on, it is highly tempting to use original parts to guarantee a perfect service, but you quickly realize that this completely destroys your profit margin. And that's when the game reveals its true nature. It doesn't want you to be an honest mechanic, it wants you to be creative. One of the most ridiculous, yet brilliant, approaches is mastering ultra-cheap substitutes. And no, this isn't a bug or an exploit. It's practically an official game mechanic. You can literally take a kitchen sponge and use it as an air filter. And the funniest part is that it works well enough for the customer not to notice, at least not immediately. Now, what really caught my attention was using pantyhose instead of a timing belt. It sounds like a joke, but the game itself fully embraces this. It's in the trailer, it's in the description, it's basically canon. Once you start using this frequently, you realize you can drastically cut the cost of repairs, especially on simpler contracts where the customer won't inspect the vehicle too thoroughly. Ultimately, this tip completely changes how you play. You stop thinking like a traditional mechanic and start playing almost like a risk manager. How far can you improvise without getting caught? And honestly, it's exactly this kind of chaotic freedom that makes cheap car repair so entertaining. One of the most authentic tricks I learned while playing is that you don't need to replace body panels every time you see a wrecked car. In fact, the game practically rewards you for making makeshift repairs, and that's where the famous technique of masking everything with putty before painting comes in. Instead of spending money buying new panels, what I do is apply putty generously over dents, rust, and even holes. Seriously, do not aim for subtlety. The more you cover up, the better you can hide the actual state of the bodywork before applying the spray paint over it. And the visual result often looks good enough to pass without any issues. What makes this interesting is that it becomes a core pillar of your strategy once you start focusing on profit. Because replacing parts is expensive, but putty is cheap. So if you want to maximize your earnings, especially when picking up highly damaged vehicles, this improvisational approach is the most efficient path. Once you get used to it, it's hard to go back. Now, whenever I look at a completely ruined car, I think, a bucket of putty and some faith will fix this. It might not be the prettiest method in the world, but within cheap car repair, it's exactly this type of clever workaround that helps you progress faster and spend significantly less. This one enters that professional hustler territory within cheap car repair. And honestly, it's one of the strongest strategies in the game if you use it carefully. When you take on cars from wealthier clients, they often arrive with parts that are still in acceptable condition, far from being completely broken. That is where the opportunity lies. Instead of simply replacing them with the best available parts, you can do the exact opposite. Install a basic, almost scrap quality part that still functions just enough to clear the job, and keep the original part that was there. The game allows this type of swap, and the interesting part is that depending on the final state of the car, the client won't even question it. Over time, you begin to build up a massive inventory of good parts without spending virtually anything. This turns into a massive strategic resource, particularly when harder missions appear or when dealing with cars that genuinely require quality components. Instead of purchasing expensive parts, you simply reuse what you acquired from other jobs. This tip completely transforms your progression because you stop relying so heavily on the shop and start creating your own resource flow. And again, cheap car repair makes it clear that this type of approach is part of the experience. It's not just about fixing cars, it's about knowing how to play the system, even if it means slightly misleading the customers along the way. This is one of the shadiest tactics cheap car repair allows you to pull off, and honestly, it works incredibly well if you know how to balance it. I'm talking about diluting the car's fluids, like adding a little bit of water to the fuel or even into the oil before handing over the vehicle. The logic is simple. You save resources and still manage to deliver the car in working condition. The secret lies precisely in the balance, because you can't just dump water randomly. I usually add only small amounts, just enough to stretch what I have without instantly disabling the car. The game clearly allows, and even somewhat encourages, this kind of quick fix. However, there is an important catch. The car needs to survive at least until it leaves your shop and drives a short distance. If it breaks down on the spot, you could face serious trouble. So it's always a quick calculation. Will this hold up for a few minutes while running? Once you get the timing down, it becomes a standard strategy to cut costs in the late game. I've delivered many cars right on the edge, hoping the engine wouldn't give out too soon. It's not exactly the most honest way to play, but within cheap car repair, it's practically part of the meta. The game lets you pull off almost any workaround, but it doesn't come without consequences. There is a customer satisfaction and anger system running in the background, and ignoring it is asking for trouble. Early on, it's tempting to put just about anything in place of proper parts, like shoved a piece of wood into the steering wheel just to save money, and move on. Except the game keeps track of these choices. Some clients are more accepting of this type of improvisation, but others will not let it slide. And when they don't, they return. And it's not a friendly return asking for a revision either. Sometimes the customer shows up with friends, and the situation turns into a direct financial loss for your workshop. We are talking broken windows, damaged equipment, and all the profit you made from the workarounds vanishes instantly. So it's not just about saving money, it's about knowing who you are dealing with. The secret here is balance. You can use cheap and even absurd substitutions, but you need to read the client's profile and hold back when necessary. In the end, cheap car repair turns into a psychological game. Fixing the car isn't enough. You have to manage risk, reputation, and avoid getting into trouble with the wrong customer. One thing that many people ignore is how much the open world can help you save money. At first, I was also stuck inside the workshop, focused solely on taking cars and completing jobs. But once I started exploring the village, I realized I was leaving free resources behind. John the Mechanic's missions are the best example of this. They aren't just minor stories thrown in. Multiple times you receive better tools and materials that, if bought, would cost a good amount of money. And the most interesting part is that this accelerates your progress significantly without requiring heavy investments. Additionally, it is highly rewarding to search around the map. There are plenty of items hidden throughout the environment, ranging from useful tools to resources you can apply directly to repairs. It's nothing incredibly hard to find, but simply stepping away from the workshop routine makes you realize how much you can lower your expenses. For me, this became part of the gameplay loop. Instead of just taking job after job, I alternate between exploration and missions. Ultimately, you return to the workshop better equipped, spending less, and securing a much higher profit margin on the next cars. If there is one item that becomes practically legendary in the late game of cheap car repair, it's duct tape. At first, it looks like just a temporary fix, but the more you play, the more you realize it is an incredible strategic tool. It's no exaggeration to say that if used correctly, it replaces half of your workshop's inventory. The secret is not to apply tape everywhere randomly, but to understand where it actually holds up under pressure. Hoses with minor leaks, slightly loose bumpers, even makeshift electrical insulation. All of this can be solved with tape, and often in a way that is good enough for the car to function normally when the customer leaves. Now, the more advanced aspect is timing and durability. Not every tape repair lasts long, and the game penalizes you if the customer returns too quickly. So you begin to learn in practice which repairs hold up long enough for the mission to be completed without headaches, and which ones are too risky depending on the type of customer. Using duct tape well is almost an art form within the game. It's not just about saving money, it's about understanding limits, risk, and opportunity. When you master this, you realize you are no longer just improvising, you are basically optimizing every cent while keeping the chaos under control. In the late game, there comes a moment when you realize it's no longer just about spending less, it's about doing everything faster. Time truly becomes money, and if you don't optimize your repair workflow, you end up falling behind even if you have resources. One thing that completely shifted my pace was following a strictly defined sequence. First sanding, then applying putty, followed by painting, and finally polishing. It sounds basic, but doing this in the exact correct order prevents rework and makes the process much smoother. Once you automate this routine, every car passes through the workshop almost on autopilot. Another major factor is disassembly. The more direct you are, without overcomplicating things or removing unnecessary parts, the more time you save. I started thinking of each car as an actual production line, trying to cut out any non-essential steps. There is also that slightly risky trick, leaving cars partially repaired overnight. You can get a lot done ahead of time this way, but you have to watch out for the Polish rain, which can ruin your progress depending on the car's condition. Still, when used correctly, this type of decision significantly helps accelerate your earnings late in the game. This tip might seem basic, but it's the kind of choice that entirely defines the pace of your progression. Early in the game, money comes in slowly and leaves very quickly. So if you buy every tool that appears, you will sink your finances without realizing it. The key is to hold back the impulse and invest only in what will truly unlock efficiency. For me, the turning point always starts with a good hydraulic jack. It might seem simple, but it drastically speeds up any job involving the undercarriage of the car, and this directly impacts the time you spend per customer. After that, the angle grinder becomes an almost mandatory tool, especially for dealing with seized parts or more aggressive improvisations. The paint gun is another investment that many people underestimate at the beginning. However, once you start taking on jobs that require finishing or want to increase the service value, it makes a real difference in the final payout. It's not just aesthetics, it's direct, better income. Once these foundations are taken care of, then it makes sense to look at lighting upgrades and workshop space. This completely changes the experience because you start working faster, with fewer mistakes, and even with better visual comfort. In the end, investing correctly at the right moment is what transforms your workshop from a makeshift chaos into a genuinely efficient business.